So hopefully you should be able to hear me all properly. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure to judge the 40-odd images that I've seen. It's quite interesting actually, seeing the difference between kind of international photography and British photography. It's all just a very, very different style really. I have to say though, looking at the weather outside, it's cold and damp, and from your counterparts who are obviously listening to this, they're probably in bright sunshine, sitting on the beach with a glass of wine. I prefer to judge your leg next year if that's possible. Steve asked me just to put about 8 images just together, just to show what the judge does. So if you just want to show these very quickly. And this is a new one called Jump. Just moving on very quickly. And I'm quite well known on the British exhibition circuit, the BPE circuit, for the use of a red umbrella. And this is Rebecca with the red umbrella, with flower thrown in the background, kind of taken almost outdoors in a abandoned factory using off-camera studio flash. And that's one of my new images, which is just taken in a studio. Once again, just very, very simple, with ballet shoes complementing the red umbrella. And once again, just using straight image, just the local park across the road. It's all just about weather conditions. Looked out the window, saw the misty trees there. Old lady on the bench just said, "Do you mind holding the red umbrella? Thanks very much." And off I went with a long lens. And taken on a slightly different day, waited for that kind of Cartier-Bresson moment, just as they walked through the goalpost there with the dog with the misty trees in the background. And I call that no play today. And then the other thing that I do enjoy, I've been very lucky to travel to Southeast Asia. So that's a portrait of a village called the Lantern People in Laos. And then the final image, that's Burma, which I travelled to about 3 years ago, and just 2 monks looking out as a monastery. So now we've seen all 40, you can see there's quite a wide range of images. So if we make a start, and what I'm going to do is just take a seat at the front and hopefully just offer really my comments and kind of views really. So the first image, abandoned room. And I can see what the author's trying to capture here. It comes across, it is an abandoned room. What first draws my attention actually, even though it's only a small part of the frame, is the face in the top left-hand corner. I think for me, the face, the chair and the piano actually make that photographic triangle that I'm looking for, to make sure my interest stays within the frame. I do like the complementary colours, those blues and yellows. I think they all fit together as a frame. It tells me, it gives me the feeling of abandonment. Sometimes I think the title's very important if the picture doesn't speak volumes to me. Now, this one actually does. Why didn't this go all the way and get the magic 20 for me? I just wondered actually if a crop on the left hand side, I can see I've started to get the edge of a table coming in there. That corner is actually quite bright. Wherever you get a dark, a bright area in a frame, your eye is always drawn to it. For me, the point of interest is the bottle and the cup on the table, that's what you want me to centre my interest around. But I'm drawn always to kind of that bright spot on the table. Possibly just burn that down, maybe a slight crop for me would actually then just make sure my eye doesn't wander from the point of interest. However, I did think it was an interesting scene. You might not have been able to move round. It might have been in a museum, or you might have been restricted because of your space. So you've got what you've got, and I think, but yes, it does work and it does tell a story for me. So it does kind of tick the boxes. So I've scored that one as a starter for 15. So landscapes for me, all about light. In here, I've got that quality light all the way through. I've got a stormy sky, which once again holds my interest in. For me, I just wondered, as my eye comes in from the left-hand side, I'm looking for, as much as there is a darker base, some interest in the foreground, interest in the middle ground, and kind of interest in the background. Now, I've got the middle ground interest, which is the light, and I've got the background. But where, as a viewer, do you want me to focus my interest? My eye wanders around the frame. I don't have anything for my eye to rest on. I've got that quality light, but as I move round, where do you want me to stop my eye going from the left all the way across the frame to the right hand side of the frame and then going out right on the corner of the frame? I need something to rest my eye on. I just didn't think that the truck in the bottom left, the bottom right corner there on the base was strong enough for me to rest my eye on all the time. But I did. I do applaud the photographer for taking the image. I think it does fit together, and I think that there is quality light there, which does add some sparkle to the image, and I've awarded that one a 15. I think taking the image against a plain black background, I think does work. Those colours are very, very bright, and I think having it on a black background just makes it kind of pop out for me. I didn't think that it was as strong as some of the images that we're going to see later on, but I think if it was taken in a kind of a studio setting with maybe window light, I think yes, it does come across to me. I just advise the author, when you start to look at some of the petals on the flowers there, they are just starting to burn out a little bit. I just wonder whether a slight underexposure would retain some of the detail there. However, I've scored this image a 14. I enjoyed this image, and I thought that the natural history, I think there's about 4 or 5 natural history pictures, I thought some of them were extremely strong, and I think this is an absolute superb example. I think the author should be very pleased with this. Once again, for kind of when I'm looking at a natural history, what does it tell me about the bird? So I've got that fantastic perch that it's sitting on. I've got that wonderful non-distracting background. It's almost one tone, one single tone, and I think that does work. I've got a catch light in the bird's eye, and I think the feather detail all the way through for me, absolutely pin sharp where it needs to be. Almost a perfect natural history picture. I just wondered, on the right hand side of the frame, I have got, as much as you are limited by your depth of field, and when you've got so many quality natural history pictures within the same competition, you've kind of got to play one against the other. I did wonder if on the right hand side that I go back to kind of highlights within the scene. I've got lichen there, just maybe just a slight tone down in the bottom right hand corner, just darken that tree. For me, I just felt that there was quite a significant section that was out of focus. So you are going to get out of focus because of your plane of focus, whether you've taken it at kind of f5.6, f8. The bird is acceptably sharp all the way through. I just felt because you've got quite a light side of that tree which is out of focus, it just, for me, just slightly offsets it. However, I've still awarded it a very competent 17. I looked at this for a while and I wanted to know, I thought it was a very interesting house, and I think that there's texture detail, and I want to look around the house, and that is my main point of interest. But when I saw the title of Haunted House, I wanted to know what the connection was to the title, and also what the connection was between the house and the ambulance. I didn't know. Judges can be quite stupid really sometimes, and they need to be kind of presented with kind of the title and how it fits together. I think it's an interesting scene. The author's decided to crop out the sky, so no highlights there. All my interest is concentrated on that house, but when I start to see the ambulance, I just wonder once again what the connection is. I wanted something just a little bit stronger for me. I did actually wonder, as much as this is a projected image competition, whether some of these pictures actually would be stronger actually printed. I wondered, just the house on its own, I think that would make a great print. So I've scored that one 12. I thought this was quite an interesting picture, quite a well-known face in the background there, Einstein. Having that in almost a monochrome colour with the young girl at the front, I think actually does work. For me though, I did wonder, because there is no contact with the photographer, they both seem to be looking at something. I just wondered would it have been slightly stronger for the girl to have some contact with the photographer. I've got no problems with the poster in the background. Looking away, I think, like I say, adds to the image, but actually just some contact, I think. I also did wonder, as much as the poster is almost monochrome, you've then got some colour right on the right hand side of the frame. Actually, would it have been stronger to monochrome all of the background, so my concentration was just on the young girl, but I think it does actually fit together, so I've awarded that one a 16. So mountain view, so working once again from the base of the image, have I got a strong base? And for me, I didn't feel it was too strong. I have got early morning light there on these reeds, and I have got a kind of almost a balance between the reeds on the left hand side and then the middle ground, which is like the island almost kind of covered by early morning mist. It is there, but once again, as my eye moves through, what does the photographer want me to look at? What is the main focal point for me? It's easy to kind of put suggestions in, and if only this happened or only that, you know, you've got what you've got, and I commend the photographer for going out early and capturing this. I just wondered if there was an opportunity on the right hand side, would it have been stronger to add, I don't know, a boat? If a boat would have been there, something, a kind of a strong foreground, so then I've got, effectively, once again, coming back to your photographic triangle, I've got the reeds with the light in the foregrass, the grasses on the left hand side, I've got the peak of the mountain, and then my eye comes back into the frame to rest on a rowing boat or something, a jetty, something solid for me to kind of complete the circle, to keep my interest in the frame. So I have awarded that one a 13. In some ways, very, very similar comments to the last one. I start from the base. There is an open gate just at the base there, so it allows me to move into the frame as I go through the fields with some snow. And I've got very interesting recession all the way through. I think the mist adds to that. Turning it to monochrome, once again, I think makes the image hang together. But where is my main focal point? I've got, if my eye moves from the left all the way across the frame to the right, I've got almost a repeating pattern of the trees, the shape of the trees. They are all slightly different, but where do you want me to stop and rest my eye? As I move right to the corner of the frame, I've got almost a break in the repeating pattern, which is the farm there in the foreground. I've got some trailer and some machinery there, but I just didn't think it was strong enough for me to stop and want to look at again. So I've awarded that one a 13 as well. So image number 9 is a lonely church. For me, I have got a base here. I've got the texture detail of the road, and I've got the stones. And as my eye follows in, I've got texture detail on the wall, and I've got the church, and then I've got an interesting ruined door on the left hand side. Once again, kind of completing the circle. I think the clouds for me are interesting as well. A bit of blue sky, but also you can feel kind of the rain clouds are starting to come in. Once I've seen the image, is there anything for me to kind of go back and look at again? I didn't actually think there was. I thought that there were stronger images. The authors decided to place the steeple of the church almost kind of dead in the centre, And I think for me, yes, it does work. Instead of kind of following conventional photographic rules of kind of thirds and having it on the left or the right, I think actually, yes, it does work having it bang in the centre, because for me, that's the point of interest. But I've still awarded that one a 13. I'm going to take a hazardous guess that this is potentially a Ribblesdale image, unless someone from Spain's been over. Quite a famous sculpture here. I thought it was very interesting tones. It looks like you've waited until an opportune moment and the tides come in. So it's kind of hidden the beach, so you've got a slow shutter speed, which adds to kind of the drama for me. The light's kind of almost bright, overcast day, but you've got detail that's coming all the way through Mary's shell, this metal sculpture. I wondered if it was actually lacking a little bit of contrast, and kind of a suggestion to the author. I wonder actually if turning it to monochrome, because for me monochrome images are all about kind of texture, shape and form, and that's what that sculpture is to me. It might be worth going to just do a kind of conversion in Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever software you use, just to see if that actually makes it for me just slightly stronger. The author, another interesting landscape. As my eye moves from the left all the way through, I'm hopping from stone to stone. As I get 3/4 of the way through the image, for me, the first stone and the 4th stone and the kind of the 8th stone look almost identical for me. Once again, it's a repeating pattern. I think that the quality of lights there, I wondered actually kind of changing your viewpoint, perhaps using a wide angle lens, making a kind of a really exaggerated foreground, making one of those rocks a very, very real strong focal point. I think for me, the 4 rocks on the bottom half of the frame look almost kind of similar in size. Just make it a more dominant feature of one of them, and I think you've got more of a stronger image for me. So I've awarded that one a 12. So I applaud the author for trying something different. So the title here of image number 12 is Moody Blue Dancer. And yes, for me, I think the position that the dancer is in, and also kind of the texture that's been either put on it or the filter that's been used, adds kind of movement to what could have been a static image for me. She has got her hand over kind of covering her face and one hand in the air, but I think the actual movement of the image, once I've seen it, I actually do want to go back and look at it again and again and again. And I think, yes, it's very different. There's just enough detail there in the face to recognise it is a face. In some ways, it's a very monochromatic image, kind of that blue all the way through, that graduated blue. But I think, yes, it does work for me, so I've given that a 19. For me, a very, very classical, almost kind of chocolate box picture for me. If I'd have taken this, I'd very happily have it on my wall. As I move through, I've got a path there. I'm moving from tree to tree. Not all the trees are exactly the same, and I think the quality of light that's coming through, adding to the reflections from the pine trees there, all the way through to the background. I think that the lighting is absolutely superb on this for me. Do I think kind of in the centre, is there a slight gap? You can see the water there. Something actually on the water possibly would have made it stronger for me, but I think still a competent image, and I'm giving that a 15. And in an image, I always look for kind of emotion, drama, and here there is some for me. Not only have you got one motorcyclist in kind of mid-action, you've got 2. I do like the way that they are at slightly different angles, and I think that the lighting has been very kind to you as well, because you've got detail in the kind of the suits that you're wearing, the motorcyclists are wearing, but also all the mud on the tyres, on the face masks, I think actually makes the image hang together. You've also got on the kind of the bottom right hand side of the frame, kind of bits of mud as well, so you get the sense that they are moving. Also, when you look at the back tyres of the bikes as well, they're not absolutely pin sharp, so you have got movement in the wheels as well. I thought that was quite a competent image, and I've given that a 16. I looked at this one for quite a while. I did think that it was a brave attempt for me. I thought, yes, the chair is, in some ways, whenever you see an image as a judge and it's something a little bit different, you always want to look again. And I wanted to know more about why that chair was there. In some ways, it looks like a fantastic beach. So I do wonder, has it been abandoned, the chair? Has it been purposely put there? It looks like it's been there for quite a while. But I think, yes, it does work for me to an extent. Just slightly starting to burn out on the chair, which could be easily corrected within Photoshop or whatever software you use. But I think actually the balance between the chair and the building on the horizon there and the cloud actually does hang together. So I've given that a 15. I think this is an absolute superb example of natural history. I think there's quality all the way through for me. You just wouldn't want to meet this silverback in a darkened alley for me. I think you've got two strong capsulites in the eye. I think the expression, I think the pose, quality of light across the back there, and the hair detail all hang together. And also, with the depth of field that there is, I get to see the environment that it's in. Very, very imposing animal for me, and that's a very worthy 19. So image 14, Roman sunset. And yeah, I can see what attracted the photographer, kind of the interesting lights just as it's going down. And I think, yes, a worthy sunset. For me, though, I can see the three columns of the ruined building, but I'm wanting a little bit more detail in the foreground. I think that if you were going to go and take, I'd advise the photographer that if they were going to go and take the same image again, maybe just concentrate on the grasses against the sunset in the top right hand frame and just take almost a corner section and just have the silhouettes there. I think they're quite an interesting shape. When you get to the pillars, I think that because they are slightly wider and not as almost kind of a straight lines, it's not really kind of coming across for me. You have got an interesting lamppost on the left hand side, and then potentially looks like parasols or some other parts of the monument as well. I'm just looking for a little bit more detail in the base. I think on the right hand side as well, because there is almost no detail at all, it just goes to pure black because of your contrast range. So I'd advise to possibly just go and experiment again with a kind of a slightly different angle for me. So I've given that an 11. A portrait of somebody doing something always adds interest. And I think the baker here, not only do you get to see the character of the person with the beard and those two strong catchlights, once again using a portrait, so my attention is drawn to the baker, and then I also get to see the environment where he works, what he's actually making here, the bread, and I think the exposure all the way through, quality lighting on the face, not too distracting on the hands, and I think adding the hands into the frame adds to the image. And also you've got actually on the left hand side, even though in some ways it's starting to tail off into shadow, there's detail in the bread all the way through, and I think for me it hangs together and tells a story. So I think that's a very competent portrait for me. So that's an 18. I thought this one worked as well. Once again, having a black background makes the lilies stand out for me. Instead of just having almost a straight shot of the lilies, Looks like some kind of reflection's been added in, some kind of possibly flood filter or something within software. And I think, yes, it does balance out for me. I did wonder whether the top of the first lily on the left-hand side was just slightly too high. I would possibly have liked to see a little bit more space at the top of the frame for me. However, I did think that the balance between the reflection, which isn't overpowering, and the actual lilies and the detail there, with once again a 3 slightly different sizes but hanging together, would make quite an interesting piece of artwork on the wall, something that you'd want to look at again and again and again. So I've awarded that a 17. I'll put the author out of their misery. So this is the first 20 of tonight. And for me, it ticks the boxes, because I talked about kind of telling a story. And yes, I think this really does tell a story. I think it's a very interesting concept, even though I would say that it's probably been set up. I think it's been very well set up. You've got the lighting on the lady in the foreground, and then, yes, the shadow behind the curtain. In some ways, I think the person who's making the shape behind the curtain is almost just picturing themselves. Just a very, very simple graphical image. But I think that the way that they're lying in this bed with almost the kind of the lamp on, and the curtain as well, has been very, very well set up. I also think turning it to monochrome, once again, just makes it graphical to me. So I only want to concentrate on the shape behind the curtain and the person lying in the bed. No distracting colour at all. So for me, that's the first 20 of the night. I thought this was an interesting attempt as well. I can definitely see what attracted the author to this. All that rust, all that texture, all the way through. And yes, the main dominant piece of engineering that you want me to see is the steam train, and you've placed it just right for me to obviously just concentrate on that. As I start to move around the frame, though, whenever I see writing in a frame, I always want to read it. So when you notice the writing on the abandoned truck on the right-hand side, I want to see more of it. I wondered actually a slight change of angle for me would have made this image stronger. I think there's loads and loads of potential that you could have had with a macro lens here, just taking little cameo pictures just of the wheels, just of the boiler, instead of just showing me the overall scene as well. Sometimes as photographers, we see this great scene and we always want to capture absolutely everything in the frame, whereas actually I wonder whether you could have done something a little bit more artistic and actually done a triptych of rust. There's lots of similar tones in this all the way through. It looks like the author here has used some kind of HDR tone mapping, and I think to some degree it has worked. It has pulled out the rust for me. There is detail all the way through there, nothing burnt out at all, so I've given that 14. And I thought this was an interesting one as well. It is a forest, some kind of filter on as well. Having the dark line all the way through the centre of the frame, I wonder if for some reason, having it dead in the centre there, does it in some way kind of split it into two pictures for me? It's almost like, as my eye moves from left to right, as we read in the West, it's almost like an impassable barrier to go through. I prefer the right-hand side of the frame for me. I can still see the shapes of the trees. I'm just wondering if the kind of the colour palette for me is just slightly too strong. Those yellows are kind of almost glowing off the screen here. I'm wondering if kind of toning those down, but still keeping the same kind of swirling treatment, would have made the image just slightly stronger. So I've given that a 14. I think this is a good use of black and white, once again, all about lines and curves and texture. And once again, just unlike the steam engine where it was showing the entire scene, the photographer here has just shown me a little bit of a detail. And I think, yes, as a documentary, as a record picture, it does work. It is sharp. It tells me the information. Looks like it's as it says, a kind of a crank and a conrod. Yeah, it tells me enough information about it. Once I've seen it though, do I want to come back and look at it again? I don't think so. I think that there are stronger images in the set, so I've given that a 12. So it's like a Mediterranean landscape. And the author's thought about how should I present a leading into the landscape, and I think the furrows in the field here do work. It does take my eye into the frame. You have got quite strong lighting, which I think, yes, does work. It's bringing the detail in the furrows all the way through. My eye goes through to almost kind of 3/3 to kind of the top third of the frame. Is there anything, something really strong to keep my eye in the frame? I almost kind of compare this to kind of the lavender fields in southern France, where I'm following a kind of a string of colour all the way to a kind of an abandoned farmhouse or something of a point of interest. The author here, once again, though, even though the comments I've just said, has thought about it, has cropped quite a lot of the sky out. It looks like, once again, a bright, overcast day. But I think having the mountain there as kind of something as my eye leads to, I think, yes, it does hang together. But I'm just looking for something kind of stronger for me. I think it's quite the same tonal range when you look at the whatever's grown in the fields, colour of the soil, and then the colour of the roof, the colour of the mountain. It's all kind of one tone for me. I'm looking for something to kind of just to rest my eye on a little bit stronger. So I've given that a 12. I can see what attracted the photographer, the quality of light. You've got interesting light in the foreground as I move through it. The light gets stronger and stronger. I've got recession in the hills and the mountains with some snow as I move to a lighter sky. Yes, I think it does hang together. However, for me, what I did kind of feel that let the image down was I didn't think it was sharp. The kind of the foreground, you've got a peninsula of land on the right hand side, kind of a darker triangle. I didn't think that was sharp enough, and I also didn't think that the mountains in the background were sharp enough to kind of hang it together. But I thought it was definitely worth taking. Perhaps you might have been on a boat that was moving, you've got a little bit of camera shake. I would say just kind of up your shutter speed next time, just make sure everything's pin sharp all the way through. But I do think well worth having a go, because I think the quality of lighting just kind of notches it up a mark, so I've given that a 12. Having for me this does work to an extent. I've got an interesting foreground. I think the author has made, wants to get a kind of a dominant feature of the nail, and I think that there's good lighting and there's good texture to make it kind of a central point of interest. Not showing me the entire boat is absolutely acceptable, and I think what they have shown me has shown me enough of the story. There aren't any other kind of boats, or it looks like in the sea behind, and I don't think there's that much interest. What the author wants me to concentrate on is kind of the shape of the boat, the texture of the boat, and obviously it's not in a great condition as well. I think, yes, for me, it does work. I just thought that there were stronger images, so I've given that 13. I thought this was an interesting pose, and you've kind of caught the Indian dancer kind of doing something. It looks like that she's performing. Yes, it's okay, but what I would have preferred to have seen, that's a fantastic dress. I just would have liked to have seen more of it. I would have liked to have seen, if possible, kind of the dancer in more of a context. You've chosen to show me like this. Maybe on the right hand side of the frame there was other dancers, some kind of distracting public, I don't know. What you have shown me, I do think it is interesting, and you've caught it, and it's an interesting shape, especially with the arm. It does work. I just would have liked to have seen more of the dancer, really, to kind of put them into context. Was there more than one dancer? And I think that the dress, that the colours really do work. I just would have, like I say, liked to see more, so I've given that 13. Got a base, I've got the rocks, and I've got the tree as a stop, so as my eye moves from the left and I move to the right, there's nothing stopping, the tree and the roots are stopping me going out of the right of the frame. So the author has thought about how it's going to fit together. Also by including the branches into the sky there, it doesn't look like the weather's been particularly kind to you on that day. It looks like a typical Lakeland scene really. It's always kind of raining here, overcast, but including the branches in the sky once again just kind of removes the blandness of the sky for me. I wondered actually whether this would have been stronger as a print with kind of the textures in the roots kind of coming out for me, but I think if the light had been slightly kind to you or more kind to you on that day, I think it would have made a stronger image, but I've given that a 12. In some ways I thought this was quite a humorous picture, and the title says so, making a run for it. And for me, there is a triangle there. I've got the sheep on the left hand side just coming into the frame. Got no issues that there's only half a sheep, because I think there is enough sheep there to tell me what's going on, especially as you've included the lady behind who's kind of wrestling with the sheep, trying to keep it under control. I think right in the middle of the frame, my attention goes to the gentleman who's just turning round thinking, gosh, here's the sheep on the right hand side who's doing a runner. As I look round the frame, there isn't anything that is distracting, so I have got that kind of perfect triangle to go to the sheep on the left hand side, gentleman, sheep on the right hand side, and once again back. For me, what kind of let this down is I think the point of sharpness is actually the barrier on the right hand side. I think that's the sharpest point in the frame. I know you've taken the grab shot, and I think it was well worth taking. It really does tell a story of kind of British farmland and kind of shows, and it does work for me. It's just very, very unfortunate that I think the point of sharpness just isn't on the sheep for me on the right hand side. However, all that said, I think there is enough content in the story for me to keep my interest all the way through, so I've given that a 17. Looks like this gentleman's in the Mediterranean, and over there, yes, unlike Britain generally, we don't suffer with kind of large long days of kind of contrast and high sun. It looks like here you found an interesting gentleman, you've got their attention, so you've got the contact with the eyes. However, because of where you've placed the gentleman, it's unfortunate that you've got quite a lot of contrast in the scene. That for me, the background, very, very dominant, quite white there, and also because of that, your camera's tried to deal with that. So in some ways, you've lost that the eyes for me are quite dead. I'm looking for a catchlight in the eye. I think it's a very interesting face. It looks like you've got that engagement. Perhaps if you'd have got their cooperation, you could have moved them to an area where it wasn't kind of as bright overcast, just pushed them into the shadows. That, I think, would have then made it a little bit more easy on the eye instead of kind of the harsh contrast for me that it is. So I've given that an 11. I looked at this several times as well, and I think this does work. I think it's very interesting. I'd like to know where that clock is. I also think having the people together, you've got enough separation between the people for them not to merge into one area. And also you've included a base as well, so you've got the light that's coming through the clock, and you've got some shadows on the floor. Looks like a wooden floor, and I think yes, it does hang together. I think treating it in monochrome once again, just a straight graphical image. And I think, yes, that's quite strong, and I've given that an 18. Not showing me the entire animal, it is perfectly acceptable for natural history. It might have been something distracting, and I think you've thought about what to include, what to kind of exclude in the frame. And I think quite a competent pose. It does hang together. For me, though, unfortunately, you've got quite a very dominant background, almost like the portrait of the person 2 images ago. almost kind of the same comments really. You've got a very, very bright background, although unfortunately the difference here is that you never quite get the cooperation of natural history, unlike The Gentleman perhaps. But I think, yes, it's been worth taking. It is sharp where it needs to be sharp. Those eyes are sharp, and the point of focus kind of tails off with the fur. But I think, yes, it does work for me. So I've given that a 13. I liked the connection between the three girls and the expressions as well. I think, yes, it does hang together. Whether this was taken in a studio or somewhere else, I think the lighting is absolutely superb. Nothing burnt out at all. For me, why didn't it make the absolute kind of the top and it just gets a 15? Well, I kind of personally feel it was a missed opportunity. So you've got three dancers, and for someone who does dancing, I would have liked to have seen them actually dancing and doing what they're kind of dressed to do for me. However, I think the parents of the three girls will be very happy with this on their wall. And yeah, that's a worthy 15. I just would have liked to have seen them dancing potentially. Looks like that they are kind of young ballerinas. Taken at night with an interesting shape. The main kind of point of interest, the photographer's placed right in the centre of the frame. And yes, once I've looked at it, do I want to look at it again? Possibly. I thought that there were stronger images in the set of 40. What could I possibly offer to the photographer as advice? Well, you've taken it at a point in the day which looks like it's quite late on, so you've kind of lost that blueness of the sky. It's gone very, very dark, which then obviously means that you get quite a lot of contrast for your camera to deal with. If you have had an opportunity perhaps to have gone slightly earlier, you might not have done, then it's always worth going to do. You are starting on the clock, and within the tower, just starting to lose detail. It's just starting to burn out. However, for me, the main kind of dominant, as much as the tower is the figure in the foreground. Because of the position of it looks like a statue, it is looking towards the church. I'm not really getting a connection. It's the back of a person. I would have liked to have seen more of kind of the face of the person. I'm wondering actually, slight change of angle, if you'd have had a flash gun, possibly some off-camera flash, just to kind of light up the statue. For me, in some ways, it's just a rather dominant silhouette in the bottom half of the frame. So I'm wondering, slight change of angle, bit of flash, slightly different time of day would have made it stronger for me. However, I've given that an 11. I thought this was an absolutely superb example of natural history. They always say now that kind of nationally and internationally, natural history is just so high, the quality is so high. The only thing that kind of really kind of pushes natural history into kind of the top awards now on the international stage is almost a bit of sex and violence. But I think, looking at the size of the fly, quality all the way through, no highlights on the background. I think that grey background against kind of the gold, yellowy colour of the fly, I think works really, really well for me, and that's a worthy 19. So image 36, I thought this was a competent landscape. I thought quality of light all the way through. And yes, I have got a point of interest, which is the boating lake, and I've also got those snowy top mountains. I've got an interesting sky. Looks like the sun's just gone behind the cloud. However, still just strong enough foreground, the edge of the lake there, leading me from almost kind of the right-hand side, back on myself, back into the frame. I've got an interesting reflection from the boathouse there, and also the edge of the frame for me, just kind of keeping it all in together. My eye doesn't wander out. Why didn't it just make kind of the real kind of top few marks? Well, if I'm going to be really, really picky, once again, whenever I see writing in an image, I want to read it. Now, yes, this is perfectly sharp, It's not burnt out at all. I've got the texture detail. I just felt, I wondered if it would actually be stronger without the writing. Quite difficult to digitally take out, and you know, it was unfortunate that it was there. Still worth taking though, and I've given that 16. Superb example of natural history. Once again, quality background, almost kind of a single tone perfectly. The author's obviously spent an awful lot of time. Interesting perch as well. It's not just a kind of a moss-covered branch. There's fungi on the branch there, but not distracting. Then you move on to the bird. Not only is the bird perfectly in the frame, sharp from kind of tail to beak. I've got the eye there for me is actually very, very strong. That yellow eye, it's drawn to me. That's a central point, so it draws me straight in as a viewer to where I'm looking. Also, the bird is doing something as well. You can see how the animal how the bird behaves. Quality feather detail all the way through. And what I did like is the actual curve on the bird's neck as well, all the way through, as you follow all that feather detail all the way through to what the bird is doing. And that is my other 20 for this evening. You've gone out at the right time of day. You've got mist, so it adds to that atmosphere. Sun's just coming out, just coming up from behind the trees, but you've taken the frame, the image, just before it has, because I think any later would have burnt out the sky. So you have retained detail in the sky. I've got interest on the left-hand side with the branches coming into the frame, and I've got a fence. Once again, though, as my eye moves through, what do you want me to rest on? Do you want me to rest on the branches, which means I don't get into the frame, or do you want me to rest on the tree in the middle of the frame? I just need something else. It would have been, I wondered, as part of that fence line, was there an actual gate? Could there have been a gate for me to move through into the mist, into the kind of the recession? For me, I just felt with the fence along the bottom, it was almost a barrier for me kind of getting into the image. So I've given that a 12. I think from the way these two models have been arranged, there is a connection, but then there isn't a connection. I think with the having no contact with the photographer is perfectly acceptable, because I think the image title, which is Their Love Has Died, kind of does tell me why they're not engaged with the photographer, why they're not bright, happy, smiling. I did wonder, when you actually look at the projection here, you are, even though it is darker towards the bottom of the frame, you are starting, because they're both wearing something very, very dark, looks like a black polo neck and a kind of black cardigan. It's almost kind of merging in together for me. I think that the strongest character out of both of them is the gentleman on the left-hand side. I possibly just would have liked more towards the story, but I think it's well lit, competently lit, and yeah, it's an interesting take. It's somebody trying something different, so I've given it a 15. And this is tonight's final image. So here, unlike the other boat where you've taken it kind of as I'm leading it into the frame, you've shown me the whole boat here. Once again, I can see why you've taken it. There is texture detail. You've placed it centrally in the frame as my eye moves through. The only object that you want to look at is the boat. So you've placed it perfectly there. As my eye moves through, though, as I get to the sky, I'm just wondering, it looks like there's some kind of treatment been put on the frame. I'm wondering, whenever I look at a treatment within an image, I always think, does it enhance the image or does it detract? And I think for me, in this case, unlike some of the images we've seen, like, for example, the dancer that I gave a 19 to, I think here, I didn't think the treatment actually added to the image. I almost felt you were using the treatment to kind of disguise something. It wasn't, a great day, etc. I'm wondering, actually, a boost in the contrast of the image, would have that made it stronger? Or once again, going really, really close. You've got some writing there, where I think it says I crab or J crab. Just taking a section there, kind of doing a triptych of kind of texture details, that possibly would have been stronger than showing me the overall scene for me. So I've given that a 12